The steel screamed long before the atom ever did. In the winter of 1938, the Third Reich wasn't just building a war machine. It was constructing a temple of hubris, a billion-dollar empire of logic designed to last 1,000 years. But they were building it on a foundation of ash. It wasn't just a scientific breakthrough. It was a tactical suicide. How did the most disciplined regime in history manage to exile the only mind that held the secret to the ultimate weapon? They traded the keys to the sun for a handful of propaganda. While the generals obsessed over the purity of blood, they missed the purity of the math. The only warning came from a woman they had already sentenced to a ghost's existence. A slight, gray-haired figure in a wool coat standing against the iron weight of an empire. Why did the powerful system ignore the only tactic that could save them? The answer wasn't in the classified vaults, but in the hands of the underdog. July 1938. Berlin is a city of shadows and iron. At the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, the air is thick with the scent of ozone and the heavy silence of fear. Lise Meitner sits at her desk, surrounded by the quiet hum of equipment that has been her life for 30 years. To look at her slight, gray-haired, and impeccably dressed, you wouldn't see a revolutionary. But inside her mind, the very structure of the universe is being dismantled. For 3 decades, she has been the ghost in the institute. In the early years, she had to enter through the basement because women weren't allowed in the main laboratories. She worked for no pay, her existence tolerated only because her genius was too bright to ignore. But now, the tolerance has vanished. The swastika hanged over the entrance, and the laws of the Third Reich have finally caught up with the laws of physics. The system has decided that Lisa is a non-person. Her partner, Otto Hahn, is a man of precision and prestige. To the outside world, they are the perfect pair, the chemist and the physicist. But in the private rooms of the Reich's ministry, the sentiment is different. One official, a man who values the set of a jaw more than the accuracy of a calculation, sneers at her name. To him, Lise is a liability, a stain on the purity of their vision. He represents the crystallized arrogance of the era, believing that the German spirit can bend the truth of the natural world to its will. "We do not need the insights of the displaced," he might have said, his finger tracing the edge of a file. "German science will find its own way, and it will do so with its own people." They claimed that the laws of physics could be dictated by political decree because the party manual said so. But the atom does not care about flags. The technical problem they were chasing was a monster hidden in plain sight. For years, the world's greatest minds had been firing neutrons at uranium, trying to create transuranic elements, heavier, more complex versions of what already existed. The process was supposed to be additive, like building a tower one brick at a time. The uranium nucleus is like a liquid drop of immense power, held together by a fragile surface tension. When hit by a neutron, the establishment manual said it should simply grow heavier. But the physics was a trap. The input of a single particle caused the drop to oscillate, stretching until the tension snapped. The output wasn't growth. It was a violent rupture of the universe itself. Yet, as Lisa prepares her escape, the data is beginning to scream, and the men in charge are deaf to it. While the Reich's directors celebrated their own brilliance and toasted to an Aryan future, Lise was already in the dark, packing a single small suitcase. She is forced to flee with nothing but a diamond ring, a gift from Otto Hahn's mother, meant to bribe a border guard if the steel trap of the border closes too tightly. She is a pioneer of the invisible, yet she is being treated like a common thief. The directors of the institute dismissed the loss of Meitner as a minor administrative necessity. They believed their laboratory was the center of the intellectual world and that success was guaranteed by their status. But they had fatally underestimated the ghost they had just chased away. It wasn't just a scientist leaving Berlin. It was the only map to the most dangerous power in existence, walking out the door and into the snow. Lise isn't just fleeing a regime. She is committing high treason against the future of the Third Reich. Her mind is a classified weapon, and by crossing that border, she is stealing the most valuable intellectual property in human history. The diamond ring in her pocket isn't a keepsake. It is a blood bribe for a border guard's silence. If the SS officer at the carriage door looks too closely at her papers, there will be no trial. The system doesn't imprison traitors of this magnitude. It erases them. She sits in the suffocating heat of the train, knowing that every minute she remains on German soil, she is a walking death warrant for herself and anyone who helped her. She is a data thief in a world where the data is made of fire. She sits in the corner of the compartment, her eyes fixed on the passing German landscape. She thinks of the laboratory, the thousands of hours spent in the basement, the quiet conversations with Hahn. She remembers when they were just scientists, before the world went mad. But the madness is the new reality. She crosses the border. She is safe, but she is hollow. In Berlin, Otto Hahn stands in the laboratory they built together, staring at a series of results he cannot explain. He has the data. He has the prestige. He has the protection of the state. But he is missing the only mind that can make the numbers speak. He sends letters to her in exile, coded messages disguised as professional queries. The results are strange, he writes. The uranium seems to be turning into barium, but that is impossible. Barium is much lighter. It shouldn't be there. He is a master chemist, but he is looking at the world through a keyhole. He sees the what, but he cannot see the how. While the German High Command looked at the map of Europe and saw a playground for their tanks, they failed to look at the chalkboard in the basement of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. They treated the departure of a mere woman as a footnote. But as the winter of 1938 settles over the continent, the boss, the unforgiving laws of nuclear physics, is preparing to remind them that the smallest particle can topple the largest empire. The Reich was confident. They had the resources. They had the uranium. They had the political will. But they had traded their greatest asset for a set of ideological blinkers. They believed that by removing Lise Meitner, they were cleaning their house. In reality, they were throwing away the keys to the future. Now, in the biting cold of Sweden, a woman with no home and no laboratory is about to do what the entire German war machine could not. She is about to see the invisible. December 1938. The world is a darkening stage, and the actors are taking their places for a tragedy they do not yet understand. While the gears of the German war machine grind toward the borders of Poland, Lise Meitner is a ghost in a frozen landscape. She is in Kungälv, a small town in Sweden, staying in a modest hotel. There are no polished brass instruments here. There is no institute. There is only the biting, clinical silence of a Swedish winter and the weight of a correspondence that refuses to let her rest. Otto Hahn is desperate. Back in Berlin, his experiments are failing the test of logic. Every time he bombards uranium with neutrons, he expects to find heavier elements. Instead, he finds barium, an element roughly half the weight of uranium. It is as if he had fired a pebble at a boulder, and the boulder had simply vanished, leaving two smaller stones in its place. To a chemist of the old guard, this is heresy. It is a violation of the Canon, manual of the universe they had spent their lives writing. He writes to Lise, his words practically trembling on the page. Perhaps you can come up with some sort of fantastic explanation, he pleads. He is the establishment, the man with the laboratory, yet he is reaching out across the void to the woman he allowed to be exiled, because he knows that without her, he is blind. Lise walks into the snow with her nephew, Otto Frisch, a young physicist who has also fled the shadow of the Reich. Frisch is on skis. Lise is on foot, marching through the drifts with the grim determination of a soldier. The cold is an abrasive force, but for Lise, it is a clarion call. In the silence of the woods, away from the noise of politics and the stench of burning books, the ghost begins to work. They stop to sit on a fallen log. Lise pulls a scrap of paper from her pocket and a pencil. This is her laboratory now. She begins to think about the liquid drop model, a theory proposed by George Gamow and Niels Bohr. Most scientists treated the atomic nucleus like a solid, impenetrable billiard ball. But Lise sees it differently. She sees it as a drop of water held together by the tension of its own surface. In the black box of the atom, the physics is brutal. Input: a single, slow-moving neutron enters the uranium nucleus. Black box. Instead of sticking, the neutron causes the nucleus to wobble. The surface tension stretches. The drop becomes an elongated dumbbell shape. The electrical repulsion between the two ends becomes stronger than the force holding them together. Output: the drop snaps. The nucleus doesn't just chip, it divides. It is fission. But there is a terrifying discrepancy. When Lise adds up the mass of the resulting fragments, they don't equal the original uranium atom. A tiny fraction of mass has vanished. In the frozen stillness of the Swedish woods, Lise remembers a formula from a man she once met in Berlin, Albert Einstein. Mein $2. She realizes that the missing mass hasn't disappeared. It has been converted into pure, raw energy. She calculates the numbers in the margin of her paper. The energy released from a single atom is small enough to make a grain of sand twitch, but when multiplied by the trillions of atoms in a handful of uranium, it is a power that could level a city. While the experts in Berlin were busy trying to force the universe to fit their ideological molds, an exile in a wool coat was scrawling the blueprint for the end of the world on a piece of trash. She had handed humanity the keys to the sun. But the context of 1938 transforms those keys into something much darker. The yes, but of discovery begins to take hold. Yes, she has solved the mystery that baffled the world's greatest chemists. But by doing so, she has realized that her former home, the regime that wants her dead, is sitting on a mountain of uranium and possesses the technical skill to build a weapon of unimaginable horror. The internal conflict is a slow-burning acid. Lise is a pacifist. She believes in the pure truth of science, a world where knowledge is a light, not a torch. Now she is the only person on Earth who understands that the light can become a blinding, white-hot flash. She feels the ghost in the machine, the realization that her own brilliance has created a monster that could be used by the very men who hunted her. She communicates her findings to Han. She gives him the eureka moment he couldn't find for himself. She bridges the gap between his chemistry and her physics. Because she was an outsider, a woman forced to work in the margins, she didn't have the arrogance of the expert. She didn't assume the nucleus was a solid ball because the textbook said so. She saw the pattern because she knew what it felt like to be under pressure, to be stretched until you break. But the crystallized arrogance of the system is already preparing its next move. Han publishes the findings in January 1939. He includes the data. He includes the explanation. But he does not include the name Lise Meitner. He justifies it to himself and to others by claiming that including a Jewish name would jeopardize the entire project under Nazi rule. He treats her contribution as a technical error that he corrected, rather than the intellectual foundation of the entire discovery. He believed that by silencing her, he was protecting the science. But he was actually beginning the process of erasing the person who gave him his greatest triumph. The German scientific community celebrated. They saw the what, and they finally understood the how. They believed that with Meitner gone, they could harness this power for the glory of the Reich. They dismissed the warning signs of their own moral decay, believing that their technical superiority would shield them from the consequences of their cruelty. But they had fatally underestimated the hammer of history. They had the uranium, they had the math, but they had discarded the conscience. While they began to plan for a uranium club, to build a bomb for Hitler, the world was beginning to wake up, and the woman they had thrown away was about to become the most important person in the eyes of the Allies. The micro hook of fate was already set. The Nazi directors believed their pure science was invincible. They treated the absence of Meitner as a victory for their ideology. But they didn't realize that by driving her into the arms of the West, they had effectively handed the blueprints for the atomic bomb to their enemies. It wasn't a glitch in their plan. It was a fatal mechanical failure of their soul. The boss, in this case, the cold, hard reality of international physics, was about to punish their pride. The silence of the Swedish woods was about to be replaced by the frantic noise of a world at war, all chasing a spark that Lise Meitner had been the first to see. August 6, 1945. A new sun rises over Hiroshima, but it is a sun born of human hands, a light so bright it erases the shadows of the people beneath it. Across the ocean, in a quiet room, Lise Meitner hears the news. The world is screaming in a mixture of terror and triumph. At Los Alamos, the champagne corks are flying. The experts, the men of action, and the patriots have successfully harnessed the liquid drop. They have turned the equation she scrawled on a scrap of paper in the Swedish snow into a pillar of fire that has consumed 100,000 lives. The yes but of her discovery has reached its final, horrific conclusion. Yes, she unlocked the power of the universe, but the world used it to build a graveyard. Earlier in the war, the call had come. The Americans, frantic to beat the Nazis to the ultimate weapon, had invited her to join the Manhattan Project. They offered her a place among the elite. They offered her the resources of a superpower. They offered her a chance to strike back at the regime that had tried to erase her. But Lise Meitner looked at the offer and saw a different kind of darkness. She saw the same crystallized arrogance that had infected Berlin, only this time it was wearing a different uniform. She famously declared, "I will have nothing to do with a bomb." While the system of the West screamed for her genius to be weaponized, Lise remained in the shadows, holding the silence that would preserve her soul. She was the only prominent physicist on either side of the conflict to refuse the invitation. She chose exile over blood, a second exile, this time from the scientific community she had helped build. The climax of her story is not an explosion. It is a moment of time freeze in a small house in Sweden. It is the texture of the newspaper in her hands, the ink staining her fingers as she reads about the mother of the bomb, a title the press has cruelly bestowed upon her. The irony is a jagged blade. The woman who refused to build the weapon is the only one the public blames for its existence. And then comes the final, bitter stroke of the system. In 1944, the Nobel Committee meets. They look at the discovery of nuclear fission, the moment the world changed forever. They look at the data. They look at the names. And they award the Nobel Prize in Chemistry to Otto Hahn, alone, 1944. The Nobel ceremony is a sterilized theater of theft. Otto Hahn stands under the gilded lights, the weight of a gold medal around his neck. The room is filled with the elite of the scientific establishment, men who know the truth but have agreed to maintain the lie. There is no applause for the woman in the Swedish woods. Instead, there is a heavy, bureaucratic silence, the kind used to bury a mistake. Hahn gives his speech, and the name Meitner never crosses his lips. It is a deliberate surgical erasure. He doesn't look at the cameras, he looks at the floor. In that silence, the establishment isn't honoring a discovery. They are celebrating the fact that they successfully stole the sun from the woman who found it. He allows the world to believe that he was the sole architect of the atomic age. The system prefers a simple narrative. It prefers a great man in a suit to a displaced woman in a wool coat. The Nobel Committee's decision was a mechanical failure of justice, a blind spot that would remain uncorrected for decades. They treated her as a footnote, a technical assistant whose gender and status made her invisible to history. But as we look back from the vantage point of 2025, the modern echo is deafening. We live in a world still defined by the friction between the human spirit and the massive system. We see it in the way we handle our own black boxes, from artificial intelligence to genetic engineering. We see the same hubris in our leaders today, the belief that technology can be separated from morality and that the experts know better than the conscience. We like to believe we've outgrown the darkness of 1938, but the system has simply traded its jackboots for spreadsheets. Today, the corporate machine still devours the outsider, harvests the brilliant, and erases the inconvenient. Lise Meitner's story isn't a tragedy of the past, it's the blueprint of the present. We still live in a world that craves the fire, but despises the light of the conscience that carries it. Her grave in England is quiet, but the equation she left behind is still ticking in the heart of every silo and every server farm. The system hasn't changed. It's just waiting for the next genius it can use, and then discard. And the question remains, when the universe gives us its secrets, will we have the soul to use them, or will we simply burn the world down because the manual says we can? If you believe that stories like Lise Meitner's deserve to be remembered, join our ranks by subscribing, like. We have synthesized this narrative from reputable historical archives and verified sources. However, the fog of war often extends to the history books. If you spot any inaccuracies or have additional details to share, please correct us in the comments. We strive for the absolute truth, and your knowledge helps us get there. Thank you for keeping history alive.